In a room full of Charlotte's most powerful people, senators, hedge fund managers, socialites with names older than the buildings they owned, not one of them moved. Not one of them breathed too loud. They watched Garrett Cole grab Vanessa Holloway's wrist like she was something he'd already purchased, and they looked away. Every single one of them looked away, except one man. A maintenance worker in a gray uniform who didn't know Vanessa's name, didn't know Garrett's net worth, and clearly didn't care about either. He just stepped forward and said two words that cut through all that money and silence like a blade through smoke. Let go. If you've ever wondered what real courage looks like when it costs everything and asks for nothing, stay with me. This is that story. Hit the like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The Meridian Grand had been built in 1923, and whoever designed it had intended for people to feel small inside it. The ceilings were 40 feet high. The chandeliers alone cost more than most people made in 5 years. The marble floors had been imported from a quarry outside Florence, and they were polished every morning before the sun came up by a rotating crew of contractors who were specifically instructed never to make eye contact with the guests. Nathan Cross had read that in the building manual. He'd also read that the East Wing service corridor ran parallel to the main ballroom, that the HVAC junction for the entire second floor was accessible through a panel behind the coat check, and that the emergency exit near the kitchen had a faulty latch that had been flagged in 3 separate maintenance reports over the past 8 months and never fixed. He knew these things because it was his job to know them. He was the senior maintenance technician on contract for the building's overnight management, and tonight was a gala event, which meant his team needed to be invisible and everywhere at once. He stood near the service entrance to the main ballroom, holding a tablet with his work orders, wearing gray work pants and a collared shirt with the Meridian Building logo above his left breast pocket. Around him, waiters in white jackets glided past with champagne. Women in dresses that cost more than his truck moved through the crowd like they'd been born in motion. Men in custom tuxedos stood in clusters, laughing at things that weren't quite jokes. Nathan watched all of it and registered none of it emotionally. He was looking at the ceiling. Specifically, he was watching the secondary ballroom chandelier, the smaller one above the east section of the room, because one of the mounting brackets had shown stress fractures in last month's inspection, and he'd submitted a work order to have it checked before tonight's event. The work order had been signed off. Whether anyone had actually done the inspection was another question. He was going to find out before midnight. Cross! His earpiece crackled. It was Marcus, his second on the crew, stationed near the loading dock. Kitchen's got a grease trap issue. Line cook says it's backing up. How bad? Smells bad. Not overflow bad. Yet. Get Rodriguez on it. Tell her to pull the access panel under the secondary sink first before she does anything else. Copy. Nathan lowered his tablet and started making his way along the edge of the ballroom toward the east wing. He moved the way he always moved in crowded rooms. Not quickly, not slowly, just steady, taking up exactly as much space as he needed. His size made some people nervous in social situations. He'd stopped trying to make himself smaller to ease that discomfort sometime around his 32nd birthday. He was 6'2" and built like someone who had spent years doing things that required both physical endurance and precise control, and that was just what he looked like. There wasn't anything he could do about it. He was halfway across the room when he heard the voice. Not loud, not a scene, just a shift in the quality of the air nearby, the way a conversation changes register when something real starts happening under the surface of the polite words. He slowed without stopping. To his left, near one of the tall windows overlooking Tryon Street, a man in a midnight blue tuxedo had his hand around a woman's wrist. The man was somewhere in his mid-40s, silver at the temples, the kind of jaw that got photographed for finance magazines. He was smiling. The smile was the problem. It had nothing warm in it. The woman was young, early 30s maybe, in a deep green gown, dark hair pulled back, a composure about her that looked like it had been practiced until it became genuine. She was not panicking, but her free hand was very still at her side, fingers barely pressed together, and she was looking at the man with an expression that had gone completely flat. "The merger timeline isn't something I'm prepared to discuss tonight, Garrett," she said. Her voice was even, controlled. "This is a charity event." And I'm a very charitable man, the man said. Garrett, still smiling. His grip on her wrist didn't loosen. That's why I'm giving you the courtesy of this conversation instead of letting my attorneys start making calls Monday morning. I'd prefer you let go of my wrist. I'd prefer we were having a different conversation. He tilted his head slightly, almost avuncular. Vanessa, we go back far enough that I thought you'd understand by now. I'm not making a request. Nathan had stopped moving. He stood still for a moment. He looked at the room around them, the clusters of donors and politicians and board members in radius of the interaction. Some of them had noticed. None of them moved. Some were actively turning their bodies away, finding something very interesting to study in the opposite direction. He looked at the man's hand on the woman's wrist. He looked at her face. He walked over. Not fast, not slow. He stopped about 2 feet from Garrett Cole, close enough that there was no ambiguity about who he was addressing, and he said 2 words. Let go. His voice was quiet. There was no theater in it, no raised volume, no performance of authority. It was the kind of quiet that had weight. The voice of someone who had learned, in circumstances very different from a charity gala, that the person who needed to shout was the person who wasn't sure they'd be obeyed. Garrett turned. He took in Nathan's uniform, the building logo on the shirt, the tablet in his left hand. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, because men like Garrett Cole didn't really do surprise, but a recalibration, a rapid calculation. Excuse me? Garrett said. You heard me? Nathan met his eyes and held them. He didn't step forward. He didn't raise his voice. Let go of her wrist. A beat passed. The small radius of social space around the 3 of them had gone very quiet. 2 men nearby had stopped their conversation and were watching without appearing to watch. Garrett Cole's smile came back, but it was different now. Thinner, colder, more precise. Son, do you have any idea who I am? Doesn't matter, Nathan said. The smile flickered. What? Doesn't matter who you are. She asked you to let go. Let go. The moment stretched. Garrett was doing a full read now, looking at Nathan the way a man looks at something he's trying to figure out whether to dismiss or escalate. Nathan let him look. He held the eye contact without blinking, without shifting his weight, without any of the subtle physical concessions that most people made when a man with Garrett Cole's kind of money and presence turned his attention on them. Something in that absolute stillness must have communicated something, because Garrett released her wrist. He did it slowly, with great deliberateness, the way men like him did everything, making even the retreat look like a choice they were generously making rather than a position they'd been backed out of. I suggest, Garrett said, his voice very low now, that you think very carefully about what you just did. Already did, Nathan said. He held Garrett's gaze for another 2 seconds. Then he turned to the woman. He looked at her for just a moment, long enough to check that she was okay, not long enough to make it something it wasn't. Ma'am, he said, with a brief nod. Then he turned and walked back toward the East Wing service corridor. He didn't look back. Her name was Vanessa Holloway, and she'd been running Holloway Capital Group since she was 27 years old, when her father's abrupt medical departure from the company's leadership had left the board scrambling for a successor, and she'd walked into the boardroom and refused to let them look anywhere else. She had grown up in this world, the world of money and leverage and calculated social performance, and she understood its rules with the fluency of someone raised speaking its language. She knew how to handle Garrett Cole. She had been handling Garrett Cole in one form or another for 3 years, since he'd first started applying pressure around the merger conversation that he dressed up as opportunity, but that she had always understood as annexation. She knew his tactics. She knew his pressure points. She knew that the wrist grab was a deliberate choice, a small public assertion of physical authority designed to unsettle her equilibrium while maintaining plausible social deniability. She had been about to handle it. She'd had 3 responses forming, each calibrated to a different read of how far he was willing to push in public. She had not expected the maintenance worker. She watched him walk back toward the service corridor, steady, unhurried, completely indifferent to the ripple he'd just created in the room. And she stood for a moment holding the feeling of what had just happened. Around her, the gala resumed its noise. Glasses clinked. Conversation restarted. The moment had lasted maybe 45 seconds and left no visible mark on the surface of the evening. But Vanessa Holloway had a very good memory, and she noticed things. She noticed, for instance, that the man's hands had been completely still the entire time. No tension, no adrenaline tremor, the absolute stillness of someone who was not afraid. She noticed that he hadn't looked around the room once, hadn't checked for allies, hadn't gauged the social landscape, hadn't done any of the calculations that people did before inserting themselves into a conflict in a room full of powerful strangers. He just looked at the situation, made a decision, and acted. She looked for him, but he was already gone. Back through a door she hadn't even noticed was there, blending back into the invisible machinery that kept a place like this running. Garrett Cole stood at the bar for the next 20 minutes, nursing a scotch and doing what he did best, which was composing his face into the expression of a man who was completely fine and thinking about nothing of consequence. Internally, he was doing something else. He did not like being spoken to that way. He particularly did not like being spoken to that way in a room full of people who mattered. The man had been a maintenance worker. That was the uniform, unambiguous. And Garrett had been checked by a maintenance worker in front of people whose opinions he needed for 3 separate initiatives currently in progress. That was not a small thing. That was the kind of moment that, if it took on any kind of life in the retelling, could alter the way a room thought about him. He flagged down one of the event coordinators, a nervous young woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. "The maintenance technician who was working this floor tonight," he said. "The tall one. I'd like his information." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Name. Who he contracts through. I'd like it before the night is over." She opened her mouth to say something about privacy, thought better of it, and wrote something on her clipboard. "I'll see what I can find out, Mr. Cole." "Good." He returned to his drink and the surface performance of ease. He would find out who Nathan Cross was, and then he would make very sure that Nathan Cross understood what it cost to embarrass Garrett Cole. The faulty latch on the emergency exit took Nathan 22 minutes to properly address. The part that had been flagged wasn't just worn. The entire mechanism had been improperly reinstalled at some point, probably during a previous repair job, and it had been degrading ever since. He had the right tools in the kit he kept in his truck, and he worked through it methodically, replacing the mechanism rather than trying to patch around the underlying problem. While he worked, he was aware, in the way he was always aware of things he'd decided not to think about, that his heartbeat had returned to its normal resting rate within about 90 seconds of walking away from Garrett Cole. This had once surprised him. It no longer did. He finished the latch, tested it 3 times, documented it on his tablet, and moved on to the HVAC check he'd been heading for when the situation in the ballroom happened. He did not think about the woman in the green dress. He thought about her for approximately 4 minutes while running the diagnostic on the 3rd floor junction, which was 4 minutes more than he intended, and then he put it aside. He was 35 years old, and he had been very good for the past 3 years at putting things aside. What he thought about in those 4 minutes was not the obvious surface of it, not the way she looked or the confidence in her voice when she'd told Garrett to let go of her wrist. What stuck in his mind was something smaller and more specific. When he'd stepped between them, she hadn't moved behind him, hadn't tried to put him between herself and Garrett as a buffer. She'd stayed exactly where she was, and when he'd looked at her afterward, she'd been watching him with this particular kind of steadiness, not gratitude, not relief, but something more like recognition, like she was trying to figure out what kind of thing he was. He'd met that look for 1 second, nodded, and left. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to. He had 3 more work orders before his shift ended, and a drive home that would get him to his apartment by 2 in the morning, where Emma would be asleep on the couch waiting for him because she always insisted she wasn't going to fall asleep, but always did. And he'd carry her to her bed, and she'd pretend not to wake up. That was the shape of his life, and he had made it that shape deliberately, and he was, mostly, at peace with it. He closed the HVAC panel and moved on. The next 3 hours of his shift were unremarkable. Rodriguez handled the grease trap without incident. The secondary chandelier bracket turned out to have been inspected after all, improperly, but inspected, and Nathan flagged it for a proper assessment before the next event booking. Marcus dealt with a minor electrical flicker in the east corridor that turned out to be a loose junction, Nothing serious. By 1 in the morning, the gala was winding down. Nathan did his final walkthrough of the building systems, signed off on his log, and collected his kit from the service room. He was walking through the basement corridor toward the parking exit when he heard footsteps behind him. Not the footsteps of someone trying to catch up to him, more deliberate than that. He stopped and turned around. It was the woman in the green dress. She'd removed the formal wrap she'd been wearing earlier, and she was carrying it over one arm, heels in her other hand, walking in bare feet on the marble floor. She looked, Nathan thought, considerably more human than she had 40 feet away in a ballroom full of chandeliers. She stopped when she saw him stop. "I wasn't following you," she said immediately. "I mean, I was. I was told the parking exit was this way, and I saw you turn in and I figured I'd ask you to confirm that before I wandered into a basement corridor alone for no reason." "Parking exit is another 100 feet down, turn left," Nathan said. "I can walk you." "That would be—" "Yes. Thank you." She fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for about 10 seconds, which in a basement corridor at 1 in the morning felt longer than 10 seconds. "I want to thank you," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She was quiet for another moment. "What you did was, you didn't have to do it. No one else did." "I noticed." Something in his flat delivery made her glance at him sideways. He saw the corner of her mouth move. Not quite a smile, more like a small, involuntary acknowledgement of something. "I'm Vanessa Holloway," she said. "Nathan Cross." "You work for the building management company?" "Contract maintenance. I cover 3 properties in this district on alternating schedules. Meridian is Tuesday nights and event bookings." She nodded. They reached the turn. The parking structure opened ahead of them, fluorescent lights and the smell of concrete and motor oil. "Nathan," she said, pausing at the entrance, "the man you told to let go, his name is Garrett Cole. He has a significant amount of money and a significant lack of what most people would consider a proportionate response." Nathan looked at her. "Are you telling me he's going to be a problem?" "I'm telling you that men like Garrett Cole don't let things go easily." She met his eyes. "You should know that." He held her gaze for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me. It seemed fair." She shifted the heels in her hand. "My car is level 2. Elevator's there," he pointed. "Right." She took 2 steps toward the elevator, then paused without turning around. "For what it's worth," she said, "those 2 words were the most useful thing anyone said to me all night." She walked to the elevator and pressed the button. Nathan stood there for a moment, watching the door close. Then he walked to his truck. He got home at 2:16. The apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up in the South End, not the renovated, expensive part of the South End, but the neighborhood on the East Edge where the old industrial buildings hadn't yet been converted and the rents were still something a maintenance contractor could manage. The building had character in the way that old things did, which meant the hallways had good bones but the radiators were temperamental, and the stairwell smelled faintly of the dry cleaning business that had occupied the ground floor before the current laundromat. He pushed the door open quietly. Emma was on the couch under his old navy sweatshirt, feet tucked under a throw pillow, her tablet on the cushion beside her displaying the frozen frame of whatever animated series she'd been watching when she lost the fight with sleep. She was 8 years old, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's tendency to make everything around her look like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Nathan stood in the doorway for a moment. He picked her up. She made the small protest sound she always made, the one that meant she was awake enough to pretend she wasn't, and carried her to her room. She settled into her bed without opening her eyes. He pulled the blanket up. "You were late," she murmured. "Work ran long." "Everything okay?" He thought about the ballroom, the man's hand, the 2 words. The woman in the elevator with her heels in her hand, warning him about consequences she didn't owe him any warning about. "Everything's fine," he said. "Go to sleep." "I wasn't asleep." "I know." She was asleep again in 30 seconds. Nathan went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water standing at the sink. He looked out the window at the Charlotte nightline, the buildings, the lights, the particular quiet of a city after midnight when the noise had settled into its lower register. He thought about the wrist grab again, Not the action of intervening, so he didn't second-guess that, had never once in his life second-guessed that kind of decision. But the room. The gallery of well-dressed, influential people who had all looked away. He had been in rooms like that before, in a different life, wearing different clothes, and he knew what it meant when people with power collectively decided not to see something. It meant they'd already calculated that seeing it cost more than it was worth. He put his glass in the sink. He thought about Vanessa Holloway's warning. He thought about the flat precision in her voice when she said it. Not fear, not performance, just information, offered to a stranger because it was the fair thing to do. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. He slept, as he almost always did, without much difficulty. One of the few advantages he had found of a life that asked your body to be fully present was that your body knew when it was time to stop. Outside, Charlotte hummed and breathed in the dark, and Garrett Cole lay awake in a penthouse 14 blocks away, holding a name on a piece of paper, Nathan Cross, and thinking about what it meant to make a problem go away. The thing about the morning was that it was just the morning. Emma needed breakfast. Her school bag had somehow lost one of its straps and needed emergency repair with a safety pin that Nathan turned into a slightly more permanent solution with a sewing kit he kept in the kitchen drawer. She had a reading quiz on a book she claimed she'd finished, but definitely hadn't, and they spent 20 minutes at the kitchen table going through the last 3 chapters while he made eggs. "So the boy finds the compass," Emma said, poking at her toast. "He doesn't find it. He gets given it." "By the man at the lighthouse?" "By the woman who runs the lighthouse." Emma made a face. "Why does it matter who gives it to him?" "Because it matters who you get things from," Nathan said. He pushed her plate closer to her. "Eat." She ate. He dropped her at school at 8:15 and was on the road to his next job by 8:30. He had a full Tuesday. 2 commercial properties in Midtown needing HVAC assessments, a residential tower in Dilworth with an elevator issue that the management company had been dodging for 3 weeks, and a follow-up at the Meridian to properly document last night's emergency exit repair. He didn't think about Garrett Cole. He thought about the elevator issue in Dilworth, which was actually 4 separate issues presenting as one, and about the way the management company kept signing off on cosmetic repairs without ever addressing the underlying mechanical degradation, and about what was going to happen in about 18 months when the whole system needed to be replaced, and they'd wonder why no one had warned them. He had warned them 3 times in writing. He documented everything in writing, always had, even before he understood why it mattered. When you'd operated in environments where the margin for error was measured in fractions, and the people around you needed to be able to trust your reporting absolutely, you developed habits around documentation that didn't leave you when the circumstances changed. His phone buzzed at 11:47. Unknown number, Charlotte area code. He let it ring. At the Dilworth building, crouched in the elevator shaft access point, he didn't pick up calls from numbers he didn't know. At lunch, in his truck, he listened to the voicemail. "Mr. Cross, this is Patricia Keene, Facilities Director at Meridian Grand. I'm calling because I've received notification from our contract management office that your engagement with the Meridian properties has been terminated effective today. I'm sorry. I don't have the details of why, and I want you to know this wasn't initiated from our side. You'll receive a formal notice from the contract office. Please coordinate with Marcus Reyes about returning any building access credentials. Thank you for your work here." He listened to it once. Then he sat in his truck for a minute, eating the sandwich he'd brought from home, looking at the street. He wasn't surprised. He'd had enough experience with how the world worked to know that when someone like Garrett Cole said, "Think carefully about what you just did," that was not a metaphor. What he felt was not fear, exactly. It was something more like a familiar, steady frustration. The specific frustration of watching cause and effect confirm a model of the world that he'd hoped, in some uncomplicated part of himself, would turn out to be wrong. He finished his sandwich. He called the contract management office, had a brief civil conversation with an office manager who was clearly uncomfortable and couldn't tell him anything specific, and confirmed that the termination was effective immediately. He updated his calendar. He had 2 other contracts currently active, neither of which paid as well as the Meridian portfolio, and this was going to require some adjustments. He did the math in his head. He was good at math, had always been good at math. The kind of good that had once looked like a possible future career until his life made several very sharp turns. And the adjustments were manageable, but not comfortable. Emma's after-school program had a payment due next month. His truck needed new rear tires before winter. These were concrete, finite problems with concrete, finite solutions, and he was going to address them the way he addressed everything, one step at a time, in order of priority. He drove to his next job. He didn't find out until Thursday, through Marcus, that the termination had come with a flag attached, a note in the contract management system, sourced to a complaint from a senior event patron, citing unprofessional conduct during the gala. What unprofessional conduct? Marcus asked on the phone. He was angry, genuinely angry, the kind of specific anger that came from someone who'd worked alongside Nathan for 2 years and had a precise sense of what that meant. You fixed a latch that could have hurt someone. You kept the building running all night without a single incident. I know. This is because of the thing with Cole. Everyone knows it's because of the thing with Cole. Patricia told me he made a call the next morning. I figured. So what are you going to do? Nathan looked at Emma through the window of the kitchen, where she was sitting at the table doing homework, pencil tucked behind her ear, face furrowed with concentration on something she hadn't asked for help with yet, but was about to. Move forward, he said. That's it? That's your whole answer? Some rich guy torpedoes your contract because you told him to keep his hands to himself, and you're just going to… Marcus. Nathan's voice was quiet, not silencing, just grounding. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying the next decision I make has to be a good one. Anger doesn't help me make good decisions. A pause. You're a frustrating person sometimes, Cross. You know that? I've been told. What about the Dilworth job? You still got that? That one's direct contract. Should be fine. Okay. Marcus exhaled. If you need anything, I'm serious. I know, thank you. He hung up and went to help Emma with her homework. She was working on fractions. She had gotten most of them right and gotten the last 3 wrong in the same way, which meant it wasn't a knowledge gap. It was a methodological habit she'd developed that worked for simple problems and broke down when the numerators got complicated. He sat beside her and they worked through it together, not by showing her the right answer, but by asking her the questions that let her find the right answer herself. Oh, she said when she got the 4th one. Oh, that's what I was doing wrong. Yeah. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I wanted you to see it. She looked at him with the expression she'd started making recently. The one that was half exasperation and half something warmer. The look of a kid who was starting to understand that some of the things her parent did that annoyed her were actually on purpose and maybe for a reason. You're kind of annoying, she said. I know. But okay. She erased the wrong answer and redid it correctly. That's actually better. He watched her move through the remaining problems with the corrected method. Outside, the sun was going down behind the buildings, and the kitchen window was catching the last of it in a way that made the ordinary objects on the counter look briefly significant. He thought about what came next. He was not, as Marcus seemed to fear, planning to simply absorb what had happened and do nothing. That was not how he operated. But there was a difference between responding and reacting, and he had learned that difference in conditions where getting it wrong had consequences significantly worse than a lost contract. He was going to think about what came next. He was going to make careful decisions. He was going to make sure Emma had what she needed. And if Garrett Cole had more moves to make, which he almost certainly did, Nathan was going to be ready. He didn't know yet how he was going to be ready. He didn't have a plan yet. What he had was patience and a very good memory, and the practiced ability to stay calm in situations that were designed to make you panic. That was usually enough to start. Emma finished her homework. They made dinner together. Pasta, which she preferred over almost anything else Nathan knew how to cook, and she had very specific opinions about the ratio of sauce to noodle that she had inherited from no one Nathan could identify. Dad, she said, twirling her fork. Yeah. Did something happen? You've been quiet. He looked at her across the table, 8 years old and already paying attention to the specific quality of his silences. He thought not for the first time that she was going to be formidable in about 20 years. Work thing, he said. Is it a big deal? Medium deal. She considered this with the seriousness she applied to most things. Do you need help? He smiled. It was small and real and not performed. I'll let you know if I do. She nodded and went back to her pasta. Nathan ate his dinner. Outside the window, Charlotte was still and dark and going about its business. And somewhere in a building that cost more than this entire neighborhood, Nathan would never look up at, Garrett Cole was already thinking 3 moves ahead. That was fine. Nathan had never needed to be 3 moves ahead. He just needed to see clearly. And right now, sitting in his kitchen watching his daughter eat pasta and think about fractions, he could see just fine. The Dilworth contract lasted 4 more days. Nathan had known it was coming, not because he was pessimistic by nature, but because he understood cause and effect, and Garrett Cole was a man who dealt in pressure rather than precision, which meant he didn't stop applying it at the first result. He kept going until the problem was gone. Nathan had seen the type before, in different arenas, and the playbook was always the same. The call came Friday morning from the Dilworth property manager, a decent man named Howard Briggs, who had the uncomfortable voice of someone delivering news he personally disagreed with. The contract was being restructured, Howard said. The building's ownership group had decided to bring maintenance in-house. Nothing to do with Nathan's performance. These things happened. Nathan thanked him and hung up. He sat in his truck outside Emma's school after drop-off and did the math again. The numbers had gotten worse since Tuesday. He had 1 remaining active contract, a small commercial property in Noda, Tuesdays and Thursdays, not enough on its own. He had savings, but not the kind that allowed for an extended gap between steady work. He had a daughter with an after-school program that cost money and a truck that needed tires and a lease on an apartment that wasn't cheap, even in the less renovated end of South End. He was not panicking. Panic was a choice, and it was a choice that never improved anything. But he was being precise and honest with himself about the situation, because being precise and honest about situations was the thing that had kept him functional through circumstances that had been significantly worse than this. He needed new contracts. He had the skills to get them. The question was whether Garrett Cole's reach extended further into Charlotte's commercial property network than Nathan's ability to move laterally out of it. He spent Friday afternoon making calls. He had a reasonable professional network, people he'd worked alongside over 2 years, property managers who'd seen his work firsthand, a few facilities directors who'd specifically requested him by name for complicated jobs. He reached most of them. The conversations were almost all versions of the same conversation. Warm enough at the start, turning slightly careful in the middle when Nathan explained he was looking for new contracts, ending with versions of, "Let me see what's available and I'll circle back next week," that had a specific hollow quality Nathan recognized from other contexts. Word traveled fast in this city's money circles. He'd known that. He'd hoped it traveled less fast in the maintenance and facilities world, which was adjacent to that world but not identical to it. He was finding out that the distance was smaller than he'd thought. By Sunday, he had 1 tentative new conversation and nothing concrete. He told Emma he was doing some scheduling adjustments when she asked why he was on the phone so much. She accepted this with the trust of someone who had learned to read when information was being held back and had decided, at 8 years old, that she would choose to believe the edited version when the person offering it was her father. That trust was one of the things that kept him honest with himself, even when he edited outward. He didn't want to deserve it less. Monday morning, he was in the lobby of a midtown commercial tower, waiting to speak with a facilities director about a potential contract, when the elevator doors opened and Vanessa Holloway walked out. She was dressed differently than the gala, a dark blazer over a white shirt, trousers, minimal jewelry, her hair down this time. She was walking with 2 people who were clearly staff, talking with the focused efficiency of someone who had a meeting in 4 minutes and was still conducting business. She had a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other, and she was mid-sentence. She stopped. Her staff continued 2 steps before noticing and stopping also. She was looking at Nathan. He was sitting in one of the lobby chairs, a folder of documentation in his hands, waiting. He looked back at her. "Nathan Cross," she said. "Miss Holloway." A pause that her staff clearly didn't know what to do with. She glanced at them. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. They exchanged looks and moved toward the building's coffee station with the practiced invisibility of people who had learned not to witness their employer's private conversations. Vanessa crossed the lobby and stopped in front of Nathan. He'd stood when she said his name, a reflex from earlier training that he'd never fully shed. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Meeting with a facilities director, potential contract work." He paused. "You?" "I own this building." She said it without weight, as a plain fact. "The facilities director you're meeting with, that's Daniel Park. He's good people." She studied him. "Did you lose the Meridian contract?" "And the Dilworth property?" "Friday." Something moved across her face. It wasn't quite guilt. She hadn't done anything to cause it, but it had the quality of someone absorbing a consequence they'd been afraid of. "Garrett," she said. "That's what it looks like." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folder in his hands, then at him. "How long have you been working in building maintenance?" 2.5 years, roughly. "And before that?" He held her gaze for a moment. It was a reasonable question, asked directly, and he'd been asked it before, by employers, by neighbors, by parents at Emma's school who were trying to triangulate who he was. He usually gave a short, functional answer that was technically accurate and didn't invite follow-up. "A few different things," he said. She noted the deflection without pushing on it. That was something. The specific social awareness of someone who understood when a door was being kept closed and chose not to lean on it. "Can I ask you something honest?" she said. "Go ahead." "The night at the gala, you didn't know who I was." "No." "And you didn't know who Garrett Cole was?" "Not specifically, no." "So you just stepped in?" He looked at her. "He had his hand on your wrist and you'd asked him to let go. That seemed like enough context." She was doing it again. That reading she'd done in the ballroom, the one that wasn't quite assessment and wasn't quite something warmer and was somewhere in between. He let her do it. He didn't particularly like being read, but he'd found that resisting it just made people more curious. "Daniel Park is a good facilities director," she said finally. "He runs a clean operation. But I should tell you that this building's maintenance contracts go through a third-party management company that Garrett's firm has an indirect stake in." She paused. "I've been trying to extract from that arrangement for about 6 months. It's complicated." Nathan absorbed this. "So this meeting probably isn't going to go anywhere." "I don't know. It might. Daniel makes his own calls on day-to-day operations. But if Garrett's people are paying attention..." She stopped. "Then it goes the same way the others did," Nathan finished. She looked at him steadily. "I'm sorry," she said. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am." "You didn't do anything wrong." "No. But you did something right, and it's costing you, and I'm aware that those two things are connected through me." She shifted the tablet under her arm. "I want to offer you something." He waited. "I have an independent infrastructure consulting role that I've been trying to fill for about 4 months. It's not maintenance work. It's higher-level systems analysis, procurement review, facilities oversight across multiple Holloway properties. I've been looking for someone with the right combination of technical knowledge and operational judgment." She paused. "I think you have both. I've done some asking around in the past few days. People who've worked with you speak very specifically about how you approach problems." Nathan looked at her. "You've been looking into me." "Yes." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm not offering you this because I feel responsible for your situation," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm offering it because I think you'd be genuinely good at the work, and because I need someone I can trust to give me honest assessments without telling me what I want to hear." She held his gaze. "But I'm also aware that Garrett is going to continue making your professional life difficult as long as he can. And this role comes with a direct contract to Holloway Capital Group, which puts it outside the management company network he has leverage over." Nathan sat with all of that for a moment. "What does the role actually involve?" he said. "Walk with me," she said. "I have a meeting in 6 minutes, but it's only a 12-minute meeting, and there's a coffee place on the ground floor that does decent work. We can talk after." "I have my meeting with Daniel Park." "Right." She thought for half a second. "Go to your meeting. If it goes anywhere, take it. If it doesn't, call me." She produced a card from her jacket pocket and held it out. Real card, heavy stock, just her name and a number. Nathan took it. He looked at it once and put it in his shirt pocket. "You don't have to decide anything today," she said, "but I wanted you to know it was there." She looked at him for one more second, and there was something in that look that wasn't about the job at all. some acknowledgement of the specific strangeness of running into each other here in a lobby 4 days after a gala, as though the city had decided to keep putting them in the same room until they figured out what it meant. Then she turned and walked toward her meeting, and her staff materialized from the coffee station and fell into step beside her, and she was already talking again before she reached the elevator. Nathan sat back down in the lobby chair. He thought about the job offer for approximately 3 minutes. Then Daniel Park's assistant appeared in the lobby to bring him upstairs, and he went to his meeting, and the meeting was cordial and professional and went nowhere, and he was back in his truck by 10:45 holding Vanessa Holloway's business card in his hand. He sat with it for a while. He was not someone who made decisions based on the fact that a situation felt a certain way. He'd learned, at considerable cost, that feelings were data points, not conclusions. But he was also not someone who pretended that the way things felt was irrelevant. The truth was that the consulting role she'd described was closer to work he'd done before, in a life he'd put down carefully and deliberately and had not intended to pick back up in any form, than anything he'd touched in 2.5 years. The combination of technical systems analysis and financial oversight and multi-property infrastructure management was a very specific set of capabilities, and she'd identified it in him from what amounted to a brief lobby conversation and secondhand reports from people who'd watched him fix HVAC units and faulty door latches. That was either very good instinct or very thorough research. He suspected both. He called the number on the card. She picked up on the second ring. "Meeting didn't go anywhere," he said. "I figured—" A brief pause. "Are you free this afternoon?" "After 3. I have a pickup." "School?" "Daughter. She's 8. A beat that he couldn't quite read. "My office is at 200 South Tryon, 4th floor. Come at 4, bring her if you need to. We have a small lounge area outside the conference rooms that has Wi-Fi and a reasonably comfortable couch." He thought about Emma's reaction to sitting in a corporate lounge for an hour. She would probably be fine. She brought a book everywhere. 4 o'clock, he said. "I'll have someone meet you at reception." He hung up and drove to the Noda property for his Tuesday shift, which was the one contract he still had, and which he handled with exactly the same thoroughness he brought to everything. Because the fact that his situation had changed didn't mean his standards needed to. Emma was not particularly impressed by the Holloway Capitol building when he picked her up and told her they had a stop to make. "Is it going to be long?" she asked from the back seat, already with her nose in a book. "Probably an hour." "Can I bring my book?" "Yes." "Then fine." The reception area on the 4th floor was staffed by a woman named Claire, who had clearly been briefed on Nathan's arrival and who handled the introduction of an 8-year-old with quiet efficiency, setting Emma up in the lounge area with a glass of juice and an approving look at the book she was carrying. "What are you reading?" Claire asked. Emma held up the cover. "Oh, I read that when I was about your age," Claire said. "The ending is bad," Emma said. Claire laughed. "You're not wrong." Nathan watched this exchange with the specific, contained satisfaction of a parent who'd watched their kid navigate a new social environment without requiring anything from him. Vanessa met him at the door of the conference room herself. She was in the same clothes as the morning, minus the blazer now, and there was a legal pad on the table and 2 coffees. "I didn't know if you took it." "Black is fine," Nathan said. She sat across from him. She had the meeting manner of someone who was comfortable being direct, which Nathan appreciated. "I want to describe the role properly," she said, "because I gave you the abbreviated version this morning, and I want you to have the full picture." "Go ahead." She laid it out. Holloway Capital Group owned or managed 37 properties across North and South Carolina, commercial towers, mixed-use developments, 2 hotels, and several industrial facilities. The portfolio had grown faster than the infrastructure management infrastructure around it, which was a problem she'd been trying to address for 18 months. She needed someone who could move across that portfolio, assess the physical and systems condition of each property, identify where the management company's reporting was inaccurate or insufficient, and give her direct, honest analysis. "The management company," Nathan said, "Meridian Property Services, which Garrett Cole's firm has a stake in. A non-controlling stake, 19%. It's structured to look passive, but functionally it gives them access to operational data across my portfolio." She paused. "I signed that contract before I understood what I was signing. I've been trying to unwind it for months. It's proving difficult. Why difficult? Because the management company has been strategic about entanglement. Long contract terms, penalty clauses for early termination, interdependencies with my existing vendor relationships. She looked at him levelly. I think Garrett engineered it. I think the management company relationship was always intended as a pressure mechanism for the merger conversation. Nathan thought about this. So what you need isn't just someone to assess your properties. No, you need someone who can give you a clean picture of what's actually happening in your infrastructure outside of channels Garrett has visibility into. Yes, she paused. That's a more precise way of putting it than I did. He's using the operational data to know where your vulnerabilities are. I believe so. Nathan leaned back slightly. He looked at his coffee cup. He was doing the kind of thinking that looked like nothing from the outside. The particular quality of stillness that his SEAL training had ingrained and that he'd since discovered was more useful in boardrooms than it had ever been anywhere else. The compensation structure, he said. She named a number that was considerably more than maintenance contracting. That's not standard consulting rates for facilities work, he said. No, it's not. She didn't look away. I'm paying for discretion and judgment, not just technical skills. Those are harder to find and worth more. He sat with the number for a moment. Not because he was calculating whether to accept it based on it. He would have taken the job at a lower rate if the work made sense. But because the number told him something about how she understood the role. She wasn't hiring him to patch things. She was hiring him to see things clearly. I need to know something, he said. Okay. You did some asking around about me. What did you actually find out? She looked at him carefully. That you're thorough and honest and that you're harder to rattle than anyone your colleagues have worked with. That you solve the actual problem instead of the surface problem. That you document everything. That you flagged potential issues in writing before they became crises on at least 4 occasions across different properties. She paused. And that before you got into maintenance work, you left a career that people who know about it describe as exceptional, but that you apparently don't discuss. The room was quiet for a moment. I'm not going to ask you about it, she said. That's your business. What matters to me is the work. He looked at her. She meant that. He could tell she meant it. Not because people were always readable, but because she had a way of saying things without the slight tension that accompanied strategic omission. He thought about the numbers she'd offered. He thought about Emma's after-school program and the rear tires and the specific shape of a life he'd built deliberately, stone by stone, on the conviction that simplicity and honesty were worth more than what he'd had before. He thought about how that life had just been interrupted, not by his own choices, but by a man with too much money and a very thin skin. I'll take the role, he said. Something in her posture shifted. Not relief exactly, but the particular easing of someone who'd been holding a thing carefully and could now set it down. Good, she said. I'll have the contract sent to you tomorrow. One condition, Nathan said. She waited. The contract is direct to Holloway Capital. No third-party management company, routing. No Meridian Property Services involvement. Already the case, she said. I made sure of that before I offered it to you. He nodded. He picked up his coffee. From the lounge down the hall, he could hear Emma's voice. She'd apparently gotten into a conversation with Claire about the ending of the book, and she was making her argument with the specific, earnest intensity she brought to things she'd formed strong opinions on. Vanessa glanced toward the sound. The corner of her mouth moved. She has opinions, Nathan said. I can hear that. A pause. How long has it been just the two of you? 3 years. She didn't ask what happened. He didn't offer it. They stayed in that shared understanding for a moment. Two people who had both learned what it meant to carry something large without turning it into a public fact. Is the work going to take you away from her? Vanessa asked. Travel-wise, I mean. How much travel are we talking? Variable? Some weeks none, some weeks 2 or 3 days. I can try to cluster site visits to minimize overnight absences if that's useful. He thought about logistics. Mrs. Alderman next door, who'd been an informal backup plan for 2 years. Marcus, who was good in an emergency. The framework of his life was less fragile than it sometimes felt. I'll make it work, he said. Okay. She stood, and he stood also. She extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and direct, no performance in it. One more thing, she said. Yeah, Garrett is going to find out about this, probably quickly. I know. He's going to take it personally. The hire. He's going to see it as a continuation of the ballroom thing. Nathan looked at her. Is it? She held his gaze. Partially, she said, with honesty that he hadn't expected and that struck him as a point in her favor. I would have wanted to hire you based on the work alone, but I'd be lying if I said the fact that you stood up when no one else did wasn't part of why I looked. He accepted that. It was a cleaner thing than most people would have offered. Then we both know what we're walking into, he said. Yes. He picked up his jacket from the chair back. He paused at the door. Ms. Holloway. Vanessa. He registered the correction. Vanessa, I'll do good work for you, but I need you to know that I'm not doing it as a return of favor. I'm doing it because the work is worth doing and because Garrett Cole using his money to shut down people who step out of line is something I have no intention of accommodating. She looked at him for a long moment, and in that look there was, again, that quality of recognition, something being confirmed that she'd suspected. That's the most useful thing you could have told me, she said. He nodded once and went to collect his daughter from the lounge, where Emma was still making her case about the book's ending to Claire, who was listening with the expression of someone who was not entirely sure she was wrong. The first 2 weeks of the consulting role were quieter than Nathan had expected, which he recognized immediately as a bad sign. He'd worked in enough complex environments to know that quiet, in the context of a man like Garrett Cole, didn't mean nothing was happening. It meant something was happening that you couldn't see yet. The absence of visible pressure was itself a form of pressure, designed to make you relax your attention before the next move came. Nathan didn't relax his attention. He went to work. Vanessa had given him access to the facility's documentation across the Holloway portfolio, and he started the way he started every assessment, not at the surface, but at the documentation itself. The way records were kept told you almost as much as the records. Gaps meant something. Inconsistencies meant something. The specific shape of what was missing was often more informative than what was present. He set up a workspace in a small office 2 doors down from Vanessa's on the 4th floor, a room that had previously been used for storage, cleared out and given a desk and a lamp and a whiteboard he'd requested specifically. He didn't need much space. He needed a door he could close and a surface he could spread paper on. Emma thought the office was funny. He'd had to bring her in twice during the second week when her after-school program had a scheduling gap, and she'd sat on the floor with her book while he worked, asking occasional questions about what the papers were for. They're building records, he told her the first time. Like blueprints? Like the history of what's happened to buildings over time. What's been fixed, what hasn't, who made decisions about them. She thought about this. Like a medical chart. Exactly like a medical chart. She went back to her book, satisfied. He was 3 days into the documentation review when he found the first thing that didn't fit. It was small, a variance in the maintenance billing for one of Holloway's midtown commercial properties. The Meridian Property Services invoices for a 6-month period showed labor hours that didn't correspond with the work orders in the system. Not dramatically. No one had billed for a full renovation and done nothing. It was more subtle than that. The labor hours were about 18% higher than the documented work, consistently, across multiple billing cycles. Not the kind of variance you'd catch unless you were comparing 2 data sets that weren't normally compared side by side. He flagged it, documented it, and kept going. By the end of the first week, he'd found the same pattern in 4 different properties. The variance was always between 15 and 22%, always on labor, never on materials. Always in billing periods that aligned with specific regulatory reporting windows. He sat with that for a long time. Then he started looking at the financial structure underneath Meridian Property Services itself, which was technically outside his facilities brief, but which he had the access to examine because Vanessa had given him full documentation rights across the portfolio relationship with Meridian. What he found, he almost missed. It was buried 3 layers into the corporate structure of Meridian's parent holding company. A series of management fees flowing between entities that appeared, on the surface, to be administrative overhead allocations. Standard intercompany accounting, the kind of thing that showed up in financial disclosures without calling attention to itself because it looked boring enough to skip past. He didn't skip past it. He got a whiteboard marker and started drawing it out. The entities, the flows, the timing. He stared at what he'd drawn for a while. Then he went and knocked on Vanessa's office door. She was on a call. She held up one finger. He waited in the doorway, looking at the city through her window. Charlotte on a Thursday afternoon, all glass and sky, the uptown corridor gleaming in the October light. She ended the call. "What did you find?" He noticed she said, "What did you find?" not "what's going on" or "is something wrong." She'd been watching him work for 2 weeks and had apparently concluded that when he knocked on her door, it wasn't to report normal findings. "I need to show you something," he said. "Can you come to my office?" She came. He walked her through the billing variants first, the concrete documentable discrepancy in the labor invoices. She listened without interrupting, looking at the side-by-side records he'd laid out. "Meridian overbilled us," she said, "by 18 to 22% across 4 properties over an 18-month period, consistently. That's not an error." "No," he said, "that's a practice." Her jaw tightened slightly. "How much are we talking about in total exposure?" He named the figure. It was not catastrophic, not enough to threaten the company, but it was significant enough to matter, and more importantly, it was the kind of thing that pointed somewhere. "That's the surface," he said. "This is what I actually wanted to show you." He walked her to the whiteboard. He'd redrawn the corporate structure diagram more clearly, boxes and arrows, entity names, dollar amounts where he had them, question marks where he didn't yet. She stood in front of it and said nothing for almost a minute. "Walk me through this," she said. He did. He started with Meridian Property Services and worked outward, the parent holding company, Strata Management Holdings, and its subsidiary structure. The management fees flowing between Strata and 2 other entities, one registered in Delaware and one in the Cayman Islands. The fact that those entities shared registered agent addresses with 2 other companies that appeared in Garrett Cole's disclosed investment portfolio. "That's not in Garrett's public disclosures," Vanessa said. She was looking at the Cayman entity. "No, the connection is 2 steps removed. Cole's disclosed holdings include a fund, Harrington Meridian Capital. Harrington Meridian Capital has a 19% stake in Strata Management Holdings. Strata is Meridian Property Services' parent. That's the connection everyone knows about." "Right, the 19% non-controlling stake. But Harrington Meridian Capital also made a series of convertible note investments in a company called Vantage Infrastructure Partners. Those notes convert to equity if Vantage hits certain performance benchmarks." She turned to look at him. "And Vantage is one of the 2 entities receiving management fee flows from Strata." He pointed at the arrow on the whiteboard. "The fees aren't just administrative overhead. They're structured to move cash to Vantage. And if Vantage hits the benchmarks triggered by that cash flow, Garrett's convertible notes convert to equity. He ends up with a direct ownership position in a company that is currently managing your entire property portfolio's operations, without ever disclosing that he had an interest in who managed your properties." The room was very quiet. Vanessa looked at the whiteboard for a long time. He watched her processing it, not just the surface facts, but the architecture of it, the deliberateness of the layering, what it meant in terms of how long this had been in motion, and how much of her business relationship with Meridian had been a design situation rather than a commercial arrangement. "He built this before he approached me about the merger," she said. "That's my read. The Vantage notes are dated 14 months ago. You started getting merger overtures from Garrett's people when?" "About 11 months ago." Nathan nodded. "He set up the leverage first. Then he started the conversation." She turned away from the whiteboard and walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him, looking at the city. He waited. He'd learned in the first 2 weeks that she needed the space to think without someone trying to fill the silence, and he gave it to her. When she turned back, her expression had changed. The processing was done. What was there now was a particular, controlled clarity, the face of someone who had absorbed a difficult thing and was now deciding what to do about it. "The conflict of interest," she said. "If Cole's firm holds a financial interest in Vantage, and Vantage benefits from managing Holloway Capital's properties, then Cole's merger push isn't just a business proposition. He has an undisclosed financial stake in the outcome. Every communication he's made to your board advocating for the merger while holding this position is a potential securities violation." She was very still. "You can document this?" The billing variance, yes, I have that in full. The corporate structure, I can map it clearly from public filings and the documentation you gave me. The convertible notes are disclosed in Harrington Meridian's fund documents, which are semi-public. The Vantage connection requires cross-referencing the registered agent records, which is tedious but not technically difficult. He paused. What I don't have yet is the full picture of how much of this was coordinated versus coincidental. But the probability of this being coincidental is 0, she said. Close to it. She looked at him. How long have you been building this? I found the first billing discrepancy 3 days in. The corporate structure, I've been tracing it for about a week. Nathan, she paused. This kind of financial forensics, this isn't facilities assessment work. He held her gaze. He'd known this moment was coming since about day 5 of the analysis. He'd continued anyway because the work needed to be done and because he was the one who could do it. No, he said. It isn't. She waited. He was quiet for a moment, not stalling, just making a decision about how much to say and deciding that in this particular situation, the partial version was going to be less useful than the full one. Before I got into maintenance work, he said, I spent 6 years running infrastructure investment analysis for a private equity firm in New York. Before that, I was in the Navy. After I left the firm, after my wife died, I needed something different. I needed work that was concrete and physical and didn't require me to spend my days inside financial structures. He paused. I didn't leave because I wasn't good at it. She absorbed this without visibly reacting, which he appreciated. She wasn't performing surprise, she was just taking in the information. What firm? She asked. He told her. Something shifted in her expression, a small recalibration. The firm was not obscure. It was the kind of name that meant something specific to people who operated in the financial world she lived in. You ran infrastructure analysis there, she said. I built the infrastructure analysis practice. I ran it for 4 years after that. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at her. The quiet maintenance contractor, she said, not quite to him. I wasn't hiding it, he said. I just stopped needing it to be part of how I introduced myself. Now? Now it's useful. He looked at the whiteboard. So I'm using it. She exhaled slowly. It wasn't quite relief, and it wasn't quite frustration. It was the specific breath of someone recalibrating their model of a situation they thought they'd understood. Does anyone else know? She asked. That I did this work? Marcus, my former colleague from the maintenance crews, knows I had some kind of finance background. He doesn't know details. Emma doesn't know. She knows I worked at a big company before she was born, but she's 8. Vanessa nodded slowly. She looked back at the whiteboard. Garrett doesn't know. No. He had you investigated after the gala. Nathan looked at her. How do you know that? Because I know Garrett, and I know what he does when he wants to dismiss someone. He pulls a background report. Whatever he found told him you were a maintenance contractor with military service prior. Nothing that would concern him, nothing that would make him take you seriously as a threat. She paused. He didn't dig deep enough. People usually look for what they expect to find, Nathan said. That's very much his weakness, yes. She was quiet for a moment. This is why he keeps underestimating things. He categorizes people by their surface indicators and stops there. Nathan didn't comment on that. He moved back to the whiteboard. The question is what to do with this. You have a board meeting, 2 weeks from Thursday, she said. Garrett requested an emergency session. He's planning to present a revised merger proposal with new financial terms. He's been building board support quietly. I think he believes he has enough votes to force a recommendation. Does he? She was honest. Possibly. 4 of my board members have existing business relationships with Cole's firm. 3 of them have been less communicative than usual in the past month. That worries me. So you need to be ready to present before or during that meeting. I need to be ready to shut it down completely, she said. Not just raise doubts, actually shut it down. Because if I only raise doubts, Garrett will counter with lawyers and more pressure and buy himself another 60 days. And by then, he may have enough board alignment to move without me. She looked at him. I need the full picture. Every connection, fully documented, with source references, the billing overcharges, the corporate structure, the conflict of interest, all of it. I can get there, Nathan said. I need to verify two things I don't have confirmed yet. The registered agent cross-reference for the Cayman entity and the actual conversion terms on the Vantage notes. The conversion terms are in the fund documents. I'll have my legal team pull the Harrington Meridian Fund prospectus. There's a copy somewhere in our records from when Cole first proposed the management company arrangement. She paused. I should have read that document more carefully 18 months ago. He didn't tell her that was true, which would have been unkind, and didn't tell her it wasn't, which would have been false. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask it. Who in your organization knows about this investigation? She looked at him. You and me. Keep it that way. The management company has operational visibility into this building's internal communications. If Garrett has people monitoring data flows, he does, she said without hesitation. I've assumed that for months but couldn't prove it. The operational data access I mentioned, the property management reporting, it's broader than what should be necessary for routine management functions. Then we assume he can see internal email traffic and network activity, Nathan said. Anything we need to communicate about this? In person only. No email, no messaging on building systems. She nodded. She was taking this seriously, not over-dramatizing it, not dismissing it, just absorbing it as a practical parameter. There's something else, Nathan said. She waited. He was quiet for a moment, because what he was about to say was the part he hadn't entirely resolved for himself yet. The reason I can trace this structure, the reason I know what to look for, is because I've seen versions of it before. Not identical, but the pattern. A disclosed stake that looks passive, convertible instruments that look like routine debt, management relationships that look operational but function as leverage channels. He paused. In my previous work, I encountered 3 situations with similar architecture. 2 of them were eventually the subject of SEC enforcement actions. She was very still. I'm not in a position to make a legal determination about what you have here, he said. That's for securities attorneys and regulators. But what I'm telling you is that this doesn't feel like creative accounting. It feels like a structure that was designed specifically to evade disclosure requirements while maintaining effective control. You're telling me this is potentially criminal, she said. I'm telling you that a very good securities attorney needs to see everything I've documented before your board meeting, he said. Not to build a litigation case necessarily, just to understand the full scope of what you're dealing with and whether your board presentation needs to reference potential regulatory implications. She was quiet. Outside her window, the city continued its ordinary afternoon business, and Nathan thought about how strange it was. The way enormous things happen inside small rooms while everything outside kept moving at the same pace. I have an attorney, she said, Diane Marsh. She's outside counsel, completely independent of any Cole-adjacent relationships. I trust her. Bring her in, he said. But in person. Don't send her documents electronically until you've had a conversation about communication protocols. You think he's monitoring that aggressively? I think a man who built a 14-month-long financial structure to gain leverage over your company does not leave that structure unprotected, Nathan said. He's going to want to know if something has changed. He's going to be watching for signals. She looked at him with the expression she'd been giving him more frequently in recent days, not the assessment from the ballroom anymore, something that had moved past that into something more specific and harder to name. You're different than I thought you were, she said. You thought I was a maintenance contractor who happened to be brave. I thought you were a maintenance contractor who happened to be brave, she confirmed. I revised that when you started the consulting work. I'm revising it again now. He didn't know what to do with that, so he didn't try to do anything with it. I'll keep working on the documentation. I should have everything verifiable in about 10 days. That gives us 4 days before the board meeting. Should be enough time for Diane Marsh to review and advise. She nodded. She started toward the door, then paused. Nathan, he looked at her. My father built this company over 30 years, she said. When he got sick and I took over, people spent about 18 months waiting for me to fail. When I didn't, they switched to looking for ways to take it from me instead. She paused, and he could hear the weight in it. Not self-pity, something harder than that, the weight of a truth she'd been carrying long enough that she'd gotten honest about its shape. I've been very careful about who I trust. I'm not always right about it. I've been wrong about it in ways that cost me. He waited. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand what it means that I'm trusting you with this, she said. It's not just a job thing. He held her gaze. I understand, he said. She nodded once, then she left. He stood in the small office with the whiteboard and the spread of papers and the late afternoon light coming through the single window, and he thought for a moment about the specific, unexpected shape his life had taken in the past 3 weeks. A ballroom, a 2-word intervention, a lost contract, a lobby encounter. And now this, a room full of evidence that a powerful man had spent over a year engineering a trap, and a woman who'd walked into it without knowing it was there. And Nathan sitting at the intersection of both things with a set of skills he'd spent 3 years trying not to need. He picked up his marker and turned back to the whiteboard. There was still work to do, and the board meeting was 2 weeks away, and Emma had a soccer game on Saturday that he was not going to miss. He started working on the registered agent cross-reference. It took him 4 hours. He verified it twice. When he was done, the connection was no longer probable. It was confirmed, traceable, documentable, with publicly available sources. He sat back in his chair and looked at what he had. Garrett Cole had built something intricate and carefully layered and designed to be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for exactly this. It had probably taken him 6 months to assemble. It had taken Nathan 11 days to map it completely. He thought about what Vanessa had said, about Garrett categorizing people by their surface and stopping there, about underestimating things. Nathan wrote a final note on the whiteboard, underlined it twice, and capped the marker. He sent Vanessa a single text on his personal phone. They'd agreed on this channel as outside building network monitoring. Documentation complete. Ready for attorney review when you want to proceed. Her response came back in 40 seconds. I'll call Diane tonight. Thank you. He put his phone away and started organizing the papers into a sequence that an attorney could follow clearly. Outside, the city was going dark, building by building. And somewhere across town, Garrett Cole was moving his chess pieces forward on a board he still believed he controlled toward a meeting he was certain he'd already won. He hadn't looked up from the board long enough to notice that someone had changed the game entirely. Diane Marsh was 61 years old, had been practicing securities law for 34 of those years, and had the specific, unhurried quality of someone who had seen enough to stop being surprised by things while retaining the capacity to be made genuinely angry by them. She spent 2 hours with Nathan's documentation on the Tuesday before the board meeting, in Vanessa's conference room with the door closed and her reading glasses on, and a legal pad that she filled with notes and handwriting so small Nathan couldn't read it from across the table. She didn't speak much while she read. She made occasional sounds, not words, just sounds, that communicated varying degrees of recognition and displeasure. When she was done, she took off her glasses and looked at Nathan. Where did you train? She said. Navy. Then Kessler Aldridge. She set her glasses on the table. You built this documentation structure the way a litigator would, not the way an analyst would. I've been on the analyst side of enough investigations to know what the litigation side needs, he said. She looked at him for another moment, then turned to Vanessa. The billing variance is clean. Documentable, defensible, clear pattern. That alone is a breach of contract claim worth pursuing. She tapped the second section of the binder. The corporate structure analysis, the Vantage connection. This is where it gets serious. If the convertible notes perform as Cross has mapped them, Cole has a material undisclosed financial interest in the entity managing your properties. Every communication he's made to your board while holding that interest and advocating for the merger is potentially a securities fraud issue. Potentially, Vanessa said. I'm being careful with language because I don't have the Harrington Meridian Fund documents in front of me, and I want to verify the note terms myself before I use stronger words. She paused. But in 34 years, I have seen this architecture before, and the last time I saw something this deliberately layered, the person who built it spent 14 months explaining himself to federal regulators and came out the other end with a consent decree and a ban from serving as a fund manager. She looked at Nathan. You said you've seen similar structures twice. 3 times. 2 enforcement actions. 1 private settlement. Then you know what this is. I know what it looks like, he said carefully. She almost smiled. Right answer. She turned back to Vanessa. Here's what I recommend. At the board meeting, you present the billing variance documentation first. It's concrete, it's clear, and it establishes that the management company relationship, which Cole advocated for, has been actively working against Holloway Capital's financial interests. That alone gives the board a reason to pause on the merger. And the conflict of interest? Vanessa asked. You present it second, after the billing documentation has already established that something is wrong with this relationship. You walk the board through the corporate structure, the Vantage connection, the timing of the convertible note investments relative to Cole's merger overtures. She paused. You do not use the word fraud in the meeting. You do not use the word criminal. You present the facts and you let the board draw their own conclusions, with the understanding that I will be present and available to address any legal questions. He's going to push back, Vanessa said. He's going to push back hard, Diane confirmed. He's going to call it circumstantial. He's going to question the sourcing. He's going to try to make it about the credibility of whoever put this together. She glanced at Nathan, which means we need to be prepared for the fact that Cole is going to ask who you are, and the answer is going to change the dynamic in that room. Nathan had been thinking about this for several days. He'd known it was coming. The moment when the documentation's existence would require an explanation of its author, and the author's explanation would require a disclosure he'd spent 3 years choosing not to make. Let him ask, Nathan said. Diane studied him. You're sure? The documentation stands on its own regardless of who built it, but yes, if it helps the board understand the credibility of the analysis, then the background is relevant, and I'll provide it. Vanessa was looking at him across the table. She'd known since their conversation in his office, but this was different. This was the decision to let it become a public fact in a room full of people, which was a different kind of weight. She didn't push him on it, but he could see that she understood what it cost. All right, Diane said. I need 4 days to verify the note terms and prepare a formal legal memo on the conflict of interest question. Vanessa, I'll need your IR team to pull everything they have on Harrington Meridian from the past 18 months. Every communication, every document, quietly. I'll handle that personally, Vanessa said. And nobody in this building discusses this outside of this room until after the meeting. Diane picked up her glasses. Cole almost certainly has eyes on your operations. He may already know something is being prepared. If he does, he's going to try to accelerate. Call for an earlier meeting, find a procedural mechanism to push the vote before you're ready. Can he do that? Nathan asked. He has 3 board allies who could request an emergency session under the bylaws. It's a stretch procedurally, but it's possible. She stood up. So we move fast and we stay quiet. She left with a copy of the documentation under her arm, and Nathan and Vanessa sat in the conference room in the particular silence of 2 people who had just committed to something large and were each, privately, running through all the ways it could go wrong. 4 days, Vanessa said. 4 days, Nathan confirmed. She looked at the table. Are you okay with what comes after? The disclosure. I made my choice when I built the analysis, he said. I knew what it meant. She was quiet for a moment. I want you to know that whatever happens in that room, however it goes, the role is yours, permanently. That's not contingent on the outcome. He looked at her. Don't make me permanent offers before the meeting, he said. Let's see how it goes. She held his gaze. Nathan. Vanessa. I mean it. I know you mean it. He paused. I just don't want anything done out of gratitude. If I stay, it's because the work is worth staying for. That's the only version I want. She held his gaze for a long moment. You are genuinely frustrating to try to do something nice for, she said. Emma says the same thing. The corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't a full smile, but it was close. The 4 days were the hardest kind of waiting, the kind where you'd done everything you could do, and the only remaining variable was time. Nathan spent them finishing the documentation, answering Diane's verification questions as they came in, and working on 3 routine property assessments that were on his calendar and that he handled with his normal thoroughness because the work deserved it regardless of what else was happening. Emma noticed he was running at a different frequency. You're not sleeping, she said Thursday morning over cereal, with the directness she applied to observations she'd already confirmed. I'm sleeping. You made coffee twice this morning and forgot about both of them. He looked at the 2 mugs on the counter. I'm a little distracted. Is it the work thing you said was a medium deal? It's become more of a large deal. She considered this. Is it going to be okay? He thought about the question with the seriousness she'd asked it. "I think so," he said. "I've done everything I know how to do. Now it's up to other people to do their part." She nodded slowly. "That's the hard part." "Yeah." "Waiting for other people." "Yeah." She went back to her cereal. Then, "You could just tell me what it is. I'm not a little kid." He looked at her. 8 years old, chin up, trying so hard to be enough of a grown-up to be trusted with real things. His chest did the thing it did sometimes, the tightening that didn't hurt exactly, but was the body's way of registering something too significant for ordinary words. "I know you're not," he said. "When it's over, I'll tell you the whole thing." "Promise?" "Yeah, promise." She accepted this and finished her cereal, and he drove her to school and then drove to the office and worked through Thursday with the deliberate present focus he applied to things he couldn't control by worrying about them. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning on Thursday. Nathan arrived at 7:30. He dressed deliberately. Not a suit, because a suit would be a performance, and he didn't perform. Dark trousers, a pressed shirt, a jacket he'd owned for 6 years that fit well, and had no particular statement to make. He looked like what he was, someone who had come to do a job. Vanessa was already in the conference room when he arrived. So was Diane, with 2 associates and a document cart. The presentation materials were printed, tabbed, and stacked, 12 copies, one for each board member with numbered sections that matched the sequence Diane had built for the disclosure. "How are you feeling?" Vanessa asked him when he walked in. "Fine," he said. She looked at him. "Really?" "I've been in tighter situations than a board meeting," he said. Diane, across the room, snorted briefly without looking up from her papers. The board members arrived between 8:45 and 9:50. Nathan watched them come in, 9 directors in total, plus Garrett Cole, who was entitled to attend as the proposing party for the merger agenda item. The board members ranged from a 70-year-old former state treasurer to a 42-year-old tech entrepreneur who joined Holloway's board 18 months ago, and whom Vanessa had mentioned was one of the less predictable votes. Garrett arrived at 9:58. He was in a charcoal suit, unhurried, with the particular ease of a man who had pre-counted his votes and found the number satisfactory. He acknowledged Vanessa with a nod that was cordial enough to be publicly adequate and dismissive enough to communicate his private assessment. He did not look at Nathan, because Nathan was standing near the window in a posture that read, to a man like Garrett, as staff. Peripheral, functional, not worth a direct look. Nathan was fine with that. The board chair, a woman named Gloria Tran, who had the chairperson's specific combination of procedural authority and careful neutrality, opened the meeting at 10:03. The first 30 minutes were standard agenda items: quarterly reporting, a facilities update, a brief discussion of the North Carolina regulatory environment. Nathan sat in a chair along the wall and watched the room. He watched who talked to whom during the side conversations. He watched which board members glanced at Garrett when specific numbers were mentioned. He was doing what he'd been trained to do in a different context, in very different rooms, reading the social architecture of a space to understand where the real decisions were being made underneath the formal process. Then Gloria Tran moved the agenda to the merger proposal. Garrett stood up. He was good at this. Nathan had expected him to be good at this, and he was. The command presence, the calibrated confidence, the language that made a hostile takeover sound like a generous offer. He had slides. The slides were well designed. He walked the board through the merger terms with the fluency of someone who had presented this version 7 times to 7 different audiences and had refined it each time. The financial terms were genuinely attractive on the surface: premium valuation, liquidity event for early investors, operational synergies that sounded plausible if you didn't look too carefully at the assumptions underneath them. 3 of the board members were nodding before he was halfway through. Nathan watched Vanessa. She was sitting at the head of the table, hands in front of her, her expression composed and completely unrevealing. She told him she was going to let Garrett finish before she responded, that he needed enough rope to stand in front of the board as the person who had proposed this before she showed them what was behind it. Garrett finished at 11:09. He set down his clicker, smiled at the room, and said, "I'm happy to take questions before we move to a discussion vote." "Thank you, Garrett," Gloria Tran said. "Vanessa, you indicated you had a response prepared." "I do," Vanessa said. She stood. She was steady. Nathan had watched her in enough situations in the past 3 weeks to know the difference between her public composure and her actual state, and right now the two were closer to each other than usual. She had moved past whatever fear she'd been sitting with and arrived somewhere on the other side of it, in the specific territory where people who had decided to do a hard thing just did it. She walked them through the billing variance documentation first, exactly as Diane had advised. She was methodical and clear, and she didn't editorialize. She let the numbers speak. She showed the side-by-side records. She named the 18-month pattern. She put the total dollar figure on the slide and left it there long enough for every person in the room to do their own math. The nodding had stopped. The management company relationship that Mr. Cole has consistently advocated for, she said, has cost Holloway Capital Group approximately $412,000 in overbilled labor charges over the past 18 months. This is not a billing error. The consistency and specificity of the variance indicates a deliberate practice. One of the board members, the former state treasurer, a man named Gerald Oates, who had spent 40 years in finance and had the face of someone who had developed his skepticism the hard way, leaned forward slightly. "Where did this analysis originate?" he asked. "My infrastructure consultant prepared it," Vanessa said. "Nathan Cross." She looked at Nathan. The room looked at Nathan. He stood from his chair along the wall. "The documentation is in Section 2 of the binder in front of you," he said. "The source records are the Meridian Property Services invoices cross-referenced against the work order logs in the facilities management system. Both sets of records are original Holloway Capital documents." Garrett had been still through the billing discussion. His expression had done a small, controlled adjustment when the dollar figure appeared, a tightening that he'd managed quickly, and he'd recomposed. Now he looked at Nathan for the first time. "I'm sorry," Garrett said, and his voice carried the particular register of polite incredulity. Is this a maintenance worker?" "He was a maintenance contractor," Vanessa said. "He's currently my infrastructure consultant. Continue, Nathan." Nathan held Garrett's gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to communicate that he registered the dismissal and was completely indifferent to it, and then he turned back to the room. "Section 3 of your binders," he said, "covers the corporate structure underlying the management company relationship. I want to walk you through it carefully because the architecture is deliberately complex." He spent the next 22 minutes walking the board through the structure. He stood near the presentation screen and used the same whiteboard approach he'd used with Vanessa, concrete, sequential, following the money from entity to entity without editorializing. He knew this material completely. He'd mapped it 11 times in preparation. He could have done it from memory. The room got very quiet about 2/3 of the way through. Gerald Oates had taken out his own pen and was making notes. When Nathan reached the Vantage convertible notes and their relationship to the management fee flows, he paused and let the board look at the slide. Garrett's voice came from across the table. It had changed register. The cordial gloss was gone, replaced by something harder and more precise. "This is a complete mischaracterization of a standard passive investment structure." "I'm happy to take questions after the presentation," Nathan said. "I have a question now," Garrett said. "Who authorized this individual to access Holloway Capital's financial records? Who is he exactly, that he's been given access to internal corporate documentation?" "I authorized it," Vanessa said. "He's my consultant. He's a maintenance worker who got himself hired under circumstances that—" "Garrett," Diane Marsh's voice from the side of the room was quiet and absolute. "You'll have the opportunity to respond when the presentation is complete. Interrupting isn't helping your position." Garrett looked at Diane. He knew who she was. She saw him register it, and she held his gaze without blinking, and he turned back to the table. Nathan continued. When he finished, he returned to his chair. The room sat with it for a moment, the full structure visible on the screen, the source references in the binders in front of 12 people. "I want to ask," Gerald Oates said, in the careful voice of a man who had decided to ask a thing he'd already partially answered for himself, "whether Mr. Cross can speak to his professional background, given the nature of this analysis." Nathan looked at him. He had been expecting this question from this man specifically since Garrett had made the maintenance worker comment. "I spent 6 years as an infrastructure investment analyst and eventually practice head at Kessler Aldridge," Nathan said. Before that, I was a U.S. Navy SEAL for 8 years. I left finance 3 years ago after a personal loss. I've been in building maintenance work since then." He paused. "The analysis in your binders is the same work I would have produced at Kessler Aldridge. The methods are identical. The sourcing is clean." The room absorbed this. Nathan watched Garrett in his peripheral vision. The man had gone very still. The stillness of a rapid recalculation, of a model being updated with information that fundamentally changed the assessment. He had done a background check on Nathan Cross. He had found a maintenance contractor. He had not looked further because he hadn't needed to, because the surface had told him everything he'd expected to find, and he'd stopped there. Nathan Cross, former Navy SEAL. Nathan Cross, former Kessler Aldridge practice head. Nathan Cross, the man Garrett had dismissed as a maintenance worker at a charity gala, and then spent 3 weeks systematically removing from every building contract he touched. Nathan watched the understanding of that move across Garrett's face. It didn't take long. "I want to address this directly," Garrett said. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it had changed. A register shift that Nathan recognized as the sound of a man making last-ditch adjustments. "The corporate structure that's been presented here is being deliberately mischaracterized. My firm's investment in Harrington Meridian is a standard passive fund position. Any downstream relationships within that fund's portfolio are not disclosed to this board," Gloria Tran said. The room went still. Garrett looked at Gloria Tran. She was looking back at him with the specific expression of a board chair who had just decided which side of a line she was on. "The question isn't whether the investment is passive," Gloria continued, her voice measured. "The question is whether you had a financial interest, however structured, in the entity managing this company's properties at the same time you were advocating to this board for a merger that would have given you controlling interest in those properties. If the answer to that question is yes, and what's been presented today suggests it is, then this board has a fiduciary obligation to take that extremely seriously before we vote on anything." Garrett's jaw was set. "Gloria, I'm going to recommend," she continued, "that we table any vote on the merger proposal pending a full legal review of the conflict of interest question. Diane, you're here in an advisory capacity?" "I am," Diane said. "I have a preliminary legal memo prepared for the board's review. In my assessment, the conflict of interest is material, and the failure to disclose it likely implicates several securities regulations. I've already been in contact with outside regulatory counsel." That last sentence landed in the room like something physical. Garrett said nothing. Nathan watched him. The composure was still there. The man was very good, very practiced. But it had become something different now. Less a natural confidence and more the controlled performance of someone who had realized they were losing and was deciding how to manage it. The smile from the gala, that thin, precise smile, was completely gone. "I move to table the merger proposal," Gerald Oates said. "Seconded," said the tech entrepreneur, who had stopped being unpredictable about 20 minutes ago. The vote was 8-1 to table, with one abstention. The one dissenting vote was a man named Philip Haas, who had 3 existing business relationships with Cole's firm and who spent the rest of the meeting looking at the table. Gloria Tran announced that the board would be engaging independent legal counsel to conduct a full investigation into the conflict of interest question and the billing discrepancies, and that the findings would be reported to the board within 60 days. She recommended that the management company contract be suspended pending the investigation's completion. That motion passed unanimously. Then she looked at Garrett Cole. "Garrett," she said, "given the circumstances, I think it would be appropriate for you to recuse yourself from all board activities pending the outcome of the legal review." It was phrased as a suggestion. It wasn't a suggestion. Garrett looked around the table, one slow, deliberate survey of the room, taking in each face. Nathan watched him do it. He was looking for something, some foothold, some ally who would make a countermotion or raise an objection. He found nothing. The 3 board members who'd been nodding during his presentation were all looking at the binders in front of them. He stood up. He didn't speak. He gathered his materials, unhurried, precise, every movement controlled. He buttoned his jacket. He looked briefly at Nathan, and the look was not anger exactly. It was the look of a man who was filing something away for later, recalculating, regrouping. Nathan held the look without expression. Garrett walked to the door and left. The room exhaled, not loudly, just the collective breath of people who'd been holding something and could now set it down. Gloria Tran waited a beat, then continued with the remaining agenda items in the measured tone of a chair who intended to demonstrate that the meeting had a structure and the structure would be respected. Nathan sat back in his chair. He didn't feel the thing he might have expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter and more specific. The feeling that comes when a thing you did carefully and thoroughly turns out to have been worth the care. The work had been good. The documentation had held. The board had seen what was there. That was enough. Vanessa caught his eye from across the table. She didn't smile. It wasn't the moment for that. But something in her expression acknowledged what had just happened, the whole arc of it, from a ballroom wrist grab to a conference room where a man who'd spent 3 weeks dismantling Nathan's professional life had just walked out of a room without a single word to show for it. Nathan gave her a small nod. She turned back to the board meeting. The remaining agenda items took 37 minutes. When Gloria Tran closed the meeting, the board members began gathering their things with the subdued, careful energy of people who had a lot to process and weren't quite ready to do it out loud. Gerald Oates stopped next to Nathan on his way out. "Kessler Aldridge," the old man said. "I know a few people there. Good firm." "It was," Nathan said. Gerald looked at him for a moment. A long, weighing look of the kind that men who have spent decades reading rooms gave to situations they found genuinely unusual. "You should have been in that room sooner," he said. Then he walked out. Nathan stood alone in the emptying conference room, the binders stacked on the table, the corporate structure diagram still on the presentation screen. He thought about Emma's soccer game on Saturday, which he had promised he would not miss. He thought about the rear tires on his truck, and the after-school program payment, and the apartment on the east edge of South End where the radiators were temperamental and the stairwell had its own smell, and he and his daughter had built something small and specific and genuinely theirs. He picked up his jacket from the chair back and walked out of the conference room into the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of the 4th floor, where Claire at the reception desk was on the phone, and the coffee machine was running, and the city outside the window was doing exactly what it had been doing all morning, entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside one of its glass towers. That was fine. It didn't need to know. The days after the board meeting had a particular quality that Nathan hadn't expected, not the clean exhale of resolution, but something messier and more gradual, like the way weather changes after a storm. The pressure lifts, but the air stays unsettled for a while. Things need time to find their level again. Diane Marsh filed the formal conflict of interest referral with the appropriate regulatory body on the Friday following the meeting. She called Vanessa at 8 in the morning to confirm it was done, and Vanessa relayed the information to Nathan in a text that said simply, "Filed. It's in motion now." He read it at the kitchen table while Emma ate breakfast, and he put his phone face down and finished his coffee without saying anything about it. The investigation into Garrett Cole's undisclosed financial interests would take months. Diane had been clear about that. These things move slowly through institutional channels, accumulated evidence carefully, built cases brick by brick. There would be no dramatic public reckoning in the near term, no headline moment, just the slow grinding machinery of accountability doing what it did when it actually worked, which was not quickly and not cleanly, but eventually. Garrett Cole had not made any public statements. His firm's communications office had issued a brief, carefully worded note saying he was cooperating with a routine regulatory inquiry and that the merger proposal with Holloway Capital had been withdrawn by mutual agreement. The phrase mutual agreement was so spectacularly false that Nathan had to set down his coffee when he read it. The management company contract, Meridian Property Services, was formally suspended by Holloway Capital's board within the week. The transition to a new facilities management arrangement would take 60 to 90 days to complete, and Vanessa had asked Nathan to oversee it. That work was concrete and detailed, and suited him in the way that concrete, detailed work always did. He had a clear problem with documentable parameters and measurable outcomes, and he moved through it steadily. Philip Haas, the board member who had cast the single dissenting vote to table the merger, resigned from the Holloway board 12 days after the meeting. He cited scheduling conflicts. No one at Holloway Capital publicly commented on the timing. The two board members who had been non-communicative in the weeks before the meeting both called Vanessa individually to express their support for the investigation and their confidence in her leadership. Vanessa told Nathan about these calls with the specific dry tone she used when something confirmed her existing assessment of a situation rather than surprising her. Accountability is interesting, she said. People locate it very quickly once they understand which direction things are moving. It's not new, Nathan said. No, but it's still annoying every time. Bartet. Emma's soccer game was on Saturday, as promised, and Nathan was there. The field was a city park facility in Myers Park. Grass that had seen better decades, goals with nets that sagged on one side. Emma played left midfield, which suited her. She wasn't the fastest kid on the team, but she was one of the most positionally aware, and she had a quality Nathan recognized in himself: the ability to see 2 moves ahead and be where the ball was going rather than where it was. He stood on the sideline with the other parents, hands in his jacket pockets, the morning cold enough to see his breath. The game was uneventful for the first half. A lot of midfield scrambling, one near miss on each end, the particular chaos of 8-year-old competitive soccer that had its own internal logic if you watched it long enough. He was thinking about the transition timeline for the management company handover when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Vanessa, are you busy this weekend? He looked at the field where Emma had just won a 50-50 ball and turned upfield with it. Soccer game right now. Saturday afternoon is open. Can I come to the game? He looked at the message for a moment. It was a simple question that was not entirely simple. Sure. Myers Park on Moorhead. Second half just started. He put his phone away. She arrived about 20 minutes into the second half. He saw her before she found him. She was standing at the edge of the sideline in jeans and a dark jacket, looking around the field with the slight uncertainty of someone who'd arrived somewhere they weren't sure was appropriate for them. He lifted a hand. She saw him and crossed the sideline. Sorry I'm late, she said. I had trouble finding parking. There's no parking anywhere near this field, he said. There's never been parking anywhere near this field. Someone should fix that. Someone should, he agreed. They stood side by side watching the game. She found Emma on the field. He saw her scanning, then locating the right jersey, and watched for a minute without asking him to identify her. She figured it out herself, which he noticed. Number 14? She said. Yeah. She's good. She's positionally good. Her first touch needs work. Vanessa glanced at him. You coach her? I try. She has opinions about my coaching. Huh? She has opinions about everything, Vanessa said. I learned that from the book conversation. Nathan almost smiled. Yeah, she does. They watched the game in a silence that was, for the first time between them, genuinely comfortable. So, not the careful professional quiet of 2 people navigating a working relationship, but the ordinary quiet of 2 people standing next to each other on a Saturday morning watching something that mattered. Emma's team won 2-1. Emma didn't score, but she set up the second goal with a through ball that Nathan thought was legitimately well judged for her age, and he made a mental note to tell her that specifically because Emma responded much better to specific observations than to general praise. After the final whistle, Emma came off the field still breathing hard and found him at the sideline. She registered Vanessa immediately. Her eyes went there first, then back to Nathan, with a question in them that she was too socially aware to ask out loud in front of company. Good through ball in the second half, Nathan said. The one that set up the second goal. She processed this. I thought I was going to overhit it. You judged the weight well. Your positioning in the last 10 minutes got lazy. You were too far right. She made the face. I knew you were going to say that. Then why did you do it? Because I was tired. She shifted her gaze to Vanessa. Hi. Hi, Vanessa said. Good game. We won, Emma said, but my dad is focusing on the positioning thing. He seems like someone who focuses on the actual thing rather than the result, Vanessa said. Emma considered this with the seriousness she gave to observations she found accurate. Yeah, she said. That's pretty much him. She looked at Nathan. Are we getting lunch? If you want. Can she come? Emma asked, with the directness of someone who had assessed a situation and made a decision and didn't see the point in being indirect about it. Nathan looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Emma. I don't want to intrude on... You're not intruding, Emma said. We're just going to the taco place. It's not a special occasion. Vanessa looked at Nathan again. The taco place, he said, has excellent carnitas and very difficult parking, much like this soccer field. Something in her expression relaxed. The slight formality that she'd carried since arriving, the awareness of being a guest in a part of someone's life she hadn't been invited into before. Okay, she said, I'll figure out the parking. The taco place was a counter service spot 3 blocks from the park that had been on that corner for 11 years and showed it. Worn formica, a menu board with 2 letters missing, plastic chairs that had been replaced piecemeal over the years so that no 2 tables matched entirely. It was always loud on Saturday afternoons, and the line was always exactly long enough to be annoying without being prohibitive. They got a table near the window. Emma ordered carnitas with extra salsa, which she ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had just played 40 minutes of soccer. Vanessa ordered the same thing after Emma recommended it, with the conviction of an 8-year-old who had strong opinions about this particular carnitas specifically. It's the marinade, Emma told her with authority. Dad figured out what it was and tried to make it at home, and it wasn't the same. It was close, Nathan said. It wasn't the same, Emma repeated to Vanessa, as though Nathan hadn't spoken. Vanessa ate a bite and considered it seriously. She's right, she said to Nathan. It's better here. It's the volume, he said. You can't replicate it in a home kitchen. That's what he said last time, Emma said, and the time before that. Nathan accepted this without defense, which Emma seemed to find satisfying in the way that children find satisfying the confirmation that they have accurately characterized a parent in front of a witness. The conversation moved the way conversations did when one participant was 8 and had no investment in keeping things comfortable or strategic, from the soccer game to Emma's reading quiz to the book she was currently in the middle of to a question about what Vanessa's job actually involved, asked with the direct curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to know. I run a company that owns buildings, Vanessa said. Emma thought about this. Like, you decide what happens to them? Mostly. I decide who manages them, what gets fixed, where money goes. My dad fixes buildings. I know, that's actually how I met him. Emma looked at Nathan. He could see her calibrating, adding this information to whatever model she'd been building. He doesn't usually talk about work people, she said. Emma, Nathan said. I'm just saying. She looked back at Vanessa. He doesn't bring people from work, or anywhere, really. She said it matter-of-factly, without accusation, the way a child states a condition of their environment they've observed accurately. He has Marcus, who's loud, and Mrs. Alderman next door who brings food sometimes, and that's kind of it. The table was briefly quiet. Emma, Nathan said again, quieter this time. Sorry, she said, not entirely like she meant it. I just meant, it's fine that you're here. I was saying it's not something that happens a lot. Vanessa looked at her steadily. I know what you meant, she said, and her voice was direct and honest in the way that Nathan had come to recognize as her actual register. Not the polished CEO presentation, but the version that existed underneath it. You're looking out for him. That's a good thing to do. Emma looked at her for a moment with the particular assessing quality she'd had since she was very small. The look of a kid who was deciding whether something was real or performed. She went back to her carnitas. Okay, she said, which from Emma was a specific form of acceptance. Nathan looked at Vanessa across the table. She met his eyes briefly, and in that brief exchange was an acknowledgement of what had just happened. The small, awkward, completely unscripted moment that had been more honest than anything either of them could have arranged. So, after lunch, Emma wanted to go back to the park to feed the ducks at the pond, which she'd been doing since she was 4 years old and which she maintained was not a little kid thing to do because the ducks were legitimately interesting. They have a social structure, she told Vanessa as they walked the 3 blocks back toward the park. There's a dominant male and his behavior affects the whole group. It's like a small organization. Vanessa, walking beside her, considered this. That's a very specific way of thinking about ducks. Dad says you can understand how groups work by watching any group long enough, Emma said. Even ducks. Vanessa glanced at Nathan. He shrugged slightly. I said it once. She's been applying it to everything for a year. It keeps being true, Emma said. The park in October was in the particular stage of autumn that Charlotte sometimes reached. Not fully turned yet, but moving toward it. The trees a mix of green and early yellow, the light coming in low and warm through the gaps in the canopy. The pond was at the center of the park, circled by a walking path. Emma had brought the end of a bread roll from lunch in her jacket pocket, and she produced it with the practicality of someone who planned ahead for things they considered important. They walked the path slowly. Emma was ahead of them by a few feet, bread in hand, already in conversation with the ducks in the particular one-sided dialogue she maintained with them when she was feeding them, offering observations and mild criticisms of their jostling behavior. Nathan and Vanessa walked behind her. The silence between them was comfortable in a way it hadn't quite been yet. Not constructed, not carefully maintained, just there, the way silence is between people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space with words to confirm the connection. "She's extraordinary," Vanessa said. "She's 8, Nathan said. "She's a work in progress." "Most extraordinary things are." Vanessa paused. "She's got your way of saying exactly what she means." "Her mother had it too," he said. "Probably more of it from her than from me." He said it the way he'd learned to say it, present, not avoidant, but without pulling on the weight of it. Vanessa heard the balance in it and didn't press. "What was her name?" she asked after a moment. "Claire," he said. "Claire Ellen Cross." He was quiet for a beat. "She was a structural engineer. She built things that are still standing in 4 states, and she was genuinely funnier than me, which Emma got more of than I did." Vanessa smiled, a real one, small and private. "I can tell. She died when Emma was 5. Pulmonary embolism. No warning, no time to... It was fast." He said it plainly, the way a fact is stated when you've had enough years to say it without it taking your legs out from under you. "That was when I left New York, came down here. I needed Emma to grow up somewhere that wasn't inside the life Claire and I had built together. I needed to be somewhere I could be her father without everything around me being a reminder of what was missing." Vanessa walked beside him and said nothing, because nothing was what that required. He appreciated it. "The maintenance work wasn't hiding," he said. "I want to be clear about that. It was choosing. There's a difference." He watched Emma redistribute the remaining bread with what appeared to be a deliberate fairness protocol for the competing ducks. "I wanted a job where I showed up, I used my hands, I fixed things, and at the end of the day, the building was either working or it wasn't, and there was no ambiguity about what I'd done. I was tired of ambiguity." "Finance is mostly ambiguity," Vanessa said. "Yeah, and I'd been good at navigating it for long enough that I'd forgotten what it felt like to do work where the output was concrete." He paused. 2.5 years of maintenance work. I rebuilt something. Some way of being in the world that wasn't held together by the job or the money or the framework of who I'd been. He glanced at her. "And then a man grabbed a woman's wrist at a charity gala, and apparently I can't not do anything when I see that, so..." Vanessa laughed. It surprised her. He could tell by the way it came out, more genuine than she'd intended, and she let it be real rather than pulling it back. "So," she said. "So," he said. They walked for a moment. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." "The night at the gala, when you walked over, when you said those 2 words and just stood there, I've been in that world my whole life. I've dealt with men like Garrett Cole since I was in my 20s, first in meetings where they wouldn't look at me directly, and then later when they started trying to acquire me rather than dismiss me, which is honestly just a different version of the same thing." She paused, watching Emma at the pond's edge. "People say they would step in. They don't. I've watched it happen enough times, in enough rooms, to understand that the social calculus almost always wins. People decide the cost of inserting themselves is higher than the cost of looking away, and they look away." "The cost was the same either way," Nathan said. "I just calculated it differently." "You didn't calculate it at all," she said. "That's the thing I couldn't figure out at first. Most people who do brave things do them because they've decided the heroism is worth the risk. You just did it. Like the alternative was never actually on the table." He thought about that. "I don't think I'm brave," he said. "I think I got to a point in my life where I stopped being afraid of the things that used to seem frightening." He paused. When you've buried your wife and figured out how to raise a kid alone and rebuilt your entire life from the floor up, a financier at a gala doesn't really register as a threat. She absorbed that. They walked another 30 feet in quiet. What you found, she said, the corporate structure, the Vantage connection, the billing fraud. That analysis saved my company, she said it simply, without theatrical weight. I want you to understand that, not in a transactional way. I'm not telling you because I want you to know what I owe you. I'm telling you because I think you have a habit of doing significant things and then minimizing them. He thought about this. Maybe. Emma thinks so too, she said. He looked at her. You've known her for 2 hours. She told me at the taco place when you went to get napkins. She said, quote, he does a lot and then acts like it wasn't a big deal. She seemed mildly annoyed about it. He looked at Emma at the pond, who was now apparently conducting some kind of equitable distribution exercise with the last of the bread. She's perceptive, he said. She's your daughter, Vanessa said. He didn't have an answer for that, so he didn't offer one. He just walked, in the October afternoon, through a park where a city went about its Saturday business around them and felt something he hadn't felt in a specific way for a long time. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was too clean a word for something this complicated and new, but its precursor. The feeling of space opening up, of a door that had been kept carefully closed starting very slowly to become something else. He wasn't going to rush it. He'd learned what it cost to rush things that deserved to go slowly, but he was going to stop pretending he didn't feel it. Emma came back with the empty bread roll, hands brushed off, satisfied in the way she was when she'd done something she considered properly. She looked between Nathan and Vanessa with the assessing eye she'd been applying to the afternoon. Okay, she said. The dominant male is less dominant than last month. I think there's a challenge from the smaller brown one near the East Bank. Leadership transition, Vanessa said seriously. Possibly, Emma said, equally serious. I'm watching it. Let her know how it resolves, Nathan said. Emma looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether this was a joke or an instruction. She looked at Vanessa. Are you going to come back to the park? Vanessa looked at Nathan. He looked at her steadily, and in that look was everything they hadn't said directly yet. The distance between where they were and where they might eventually be. The work that would take and the time it would need, and the fact that neither of them was someone who moved carelessly through decisions that involved other people's lives. But also, underneath all of that, something simpler and more honest. Yes. I'd like to, Vanessa said. Emma nodded, satisfied, in the manner of someone who had conducted a thorough evaluation and arrived at a reasonable conclusion. Okay, she said. You should know the parking thing is a problem for the whole neighborhood. It's not just the park. I'll keep that in mind, Vanessa said. Dad can show you where to park, Emma said. He knows all the spots. Of course he does, Vanessa said. Down. The weeks that followed were not simple. They weren't supposed to be. The regulatory inquiry into Garrett Cole moved through its preliminary phase in November and expanded in December, when additional documentation from Meridian Property Services' internal records, obtained through the formal process Diane had initiated, revealed a billing practice that extended beyond the Holloway portfolio. 3 other property management clients had been charged similar variances. The scope of the case widened in a way that took it beyond anything Nathan had initially mapped, and Diane called Vanessa twice in November with updates that made the word significant feel like an understatement. Garrett Cole hired 4 attorneys. His public posture remained controlled and measured, the language of a man who was managing a situation rather than a man who was afraid. But Diane, who had spent 34 years reading the behavior of people under regulatory pressure, told Vanessa he was more afraid than he was showing, and that the hiring of 4 attorneys rather than 1 or 2 was a tell. Nathan gave a formal statement to Regulatory Counsel in late November, walking through the methodology of his investigation and the sourcing of each element of the documentation. The session lasted 3 hours and was conducted with the specificity that told him the investigative team already understood most of what he'd found and was using his testimony to fill in the remaining gaps. He didn't enjoy it. He found the process of having his own thinking taken apart and examined and verified by strangers uncomfortable in the way that any private process becomes uncomfortable when made public. But the work held up. Every source was clean, every methodology was sound. He'd known it would be, he'd built it to hold up, but there was still something strange about watching the thing he'd done alone in a small office with a whiteboard become evidence in a formal proceeding. He told Emma about it in early December, as he'd promised. Not all of it, not the regulatory details that were still in process, but the shape of it. The gala, Garrett, the contracts that disappeared, the consulting job, what he'd found, and what it meant. She listened with the focused attention she gave to things she considered important. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "So this guy grabbed her wrist," she said, "and you told him to let go." "Yeah." "And then he got you fired." "He got the contracts canceled, yeah." "And then she hired you, and you figured out he was doing something wrong." "That's the summary." She thought about this. "And he thought you were just a maintenance guy." "Yeah, because he didn't look closely enough." He looked at her. "That's a good way of putting it." She sat with the whole thing for a moment, working through it the way she worked through things. Not quickly, but honestly. "Do you think he would have done any of it different," she said, "if he'd known who you actually were from the start?" It was a genuinely good question. He'd thought about it himself. "Maybe," he said. "He might have been more careful, but I don't think it would have changed the fundamental behavior, just the target. Men like that find a way to do what they do. They just choose easier targets." "So you being a maintenance guy was actually useful," Emma said, "because he underestimated you." "I wasn't being a maintenance guy strategically," he said. "I was just living my life." "I know," she said, "but it still worked out that way." She paused. "That's kind of the point, isn't it? You don't have to be the biggest thing in the room to matter." He looked at his daughter in the kitchen light on a December evening, 8 years old, and carrying a thought that some people spent their whole lives not quite landing on. "Yeah," he said, "that's kind of the point." The holidays came and went. Christmas was the two of them, as it had been for 3 years, so the apartment decorated with the specific combination of Emma's enthusiasms and Nathan's pragmatic contributions, a tree that was slightly too large for the living room corner, the smell of the cooking he attempted and occasionally failed at, and Emma documented photographically for reasons he didn't fully understand but accepted. Vanessa had dinner with them on Christmas Eve. It had been Emma's suggestion, made with the casual authority of someone who had made a decision and was informing the parties rather than consulting them. She brought wine and a book for Emma that she'd apparently chosen after a careful 20-minute conversation with a bookstore employee about the reading level and opinion-forming tendencies of 8-year-olds. Emma opened it and read the back cover and the first page and then looked up and said, "This is a good choice," with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. It was not a smooth, cinematic Christmas Eve. The pasta Nathan made was slightly overcooked, and he knew it, and Emma told him and Vanessa ate it without commenting on the texture, which he appreciated more than if she'd been falsely enthusiastic about it. Emma knocked over a glass of water, which went on the book, which caused a brief crisis that ended with the book on the radiator to dry and everyone agreeing it would be fine. Vanessa and Emma had a 40-minute argument, friendly but real, about whether the ending of a different book Emma had read was satisfying or lazy, and neither of them fully conceded. Nathan sat at the table and ate overcooked pasta and watched the two of them argue about a book, and the feeling he'd first noticed at the park that October afternoon was larger now and more defined, something he could sit inside rather than just standing at the edge of. He wasn't going to name it prematurely. He'd spent enough of his life learning to let things develop at the speed they needed rather than the speed he wanted. But he could see, with the same clarity he brought to every assessment, what was there. Trust. The particular kind that isn't constructed out of effort, but that accumulates quietly between people who have seen each other in real circumstances and not looked away. He trusted Vanessa. Not the CEO, not the woman in the green dress from the gala, but the person who had warned a stranger about consequences she didn't owe him warning about, who had hired him when she could have just moved on, who had sat in a conference room and let the silence be honest rather than filling it with the right words. And she trusted him. He knew this not because she'd said it, though she had, but because of the way she was in the room. Not performing ease, not managing her image, just present, arguing about book endings with his daughter and eating overcooked pasta without apology. That was everything, really. The rest was time. In the new year, Holloway Capital completed its transition to a new property management arrangement, a mid-sized regional firm with a clean record that Nathan had vetted thoroughly over 6 weeks of due diligence. The changeover went the way changeovers went, which was imperfectly and on a slightly longer timeline than projected, with 3 operational issues that needed to be addressed, and 1 vendor relationship that had to be renegotiated from scratch. Nathan handled all of it. The consulting role had become something harder to categorize now than when Vanessa had first described it in that lobby conversation. It had expanded naturally in scope. He was doing financial oversight work alongside the infrastructure assessment, sitting in on portfolio strategy meetings, providing analysis that lived at the intersection of physical systems and financial structure in a way that turned out to be genuinely rare and genuinely useful. He was doing the work he'd walked away from 4 years ago, but differently, on his own terms, in a structure he'd designed at a scale he could maintain alongside being Emma's father. It wasn't the life he'd built in New York. It wasn't the deliberately simplified life he'd built in the first years after Claire died. It was something new, assembled from parts of both, and it was his. Garrett Cole, in February, accepted a consent decree that barred him from serving as a principal or officer in any registered investment entity for a period of 7 years and required the disgorgement of a sum that Diane told Vanessa was large enough to mean something significant even to a man of his wealth. His firm issued a statement framing it as a resolution that allowed him to focus on other ventures. The statement did not use the word apology because that word had apparently been removed from the draft before publication. Nathan read about it in a brief article on a Tuesday morning over coffee. Emma was at school. The apartment was quiet. He read it once, put his phone down, and went to work. There wasn't much to feel about it by that point. The outcome was the one that should have happened, arrived at through a process that had been slow and imperfect and thoroughly documented, and it was done. He had learned enough about institutions to know that this was what justice looked like most of the time. Not a dramatic moment, but a slow accumulation of accurate accounting. He was glad it was accurate. He was glad it was done. He texted Vanessa. Saw the announcement. She replied within a minute. Me too. How do you feel? He thought about it. Like it's over and we can focus on whatever comes next. A pause. Then, good answer. The last Saturday of February was cold but clear. The sky, the specific deep blue that Charlotte got on winter afternoons when the humidity dropped and the light came in sharp and clean. Nathan and Emma went back to the park. Her idea, as it had been every time since October, the duck monitoring expedition that had become a standing appointment with the seasons. Vanessa met them there. The dominant duck situation had apparently resolved itself, per Emma's ongoing assessment. The smaller brown challenger had been displaced by a younger male from the North Bank, creating an entirely new dynamic that Emma was documenting with the same seriousness she applied to everything she considered worth understanding. Nathan and Vanessa walked the path. Emma was 20 feet ahead of them, bread in one hand, conducting observations. She's made a field journal, Vanessa said. I know. She's been keeping it since November. She showed me the last 3 pages. The drawings are remarkable. She gets the visual precision from Claire, Nathan said. Claire could sketch something from memory with that kind of accuracy. Vanessa nodded. She'd heard about Claire in pieces over the months, not pried out but offered when they arrived naturally, the way truths arrive when 2 people spend enough time in honest company. I've been thinking about something, she said. Tell me. She was quiet for a moment, organizing it. When I was 27 and I walked into that boardroom and refused to let them look anywhere else, I had this very clear idea of what I was doing it for. The company, my father's legacy, proving something to the people who didn't think I could do it. She paused. I've been running toward those things for 8 years. And somewhere in the last 4 months, I've started wondering if I'm running toward the right things now, or just running in the same direction out of habit. He looked at her. What would different look like? I don't know yet, she said. That's what I'm thinking about. A pause. The company is solid. The investigation is resolved. The board is functioning. I could probably step back from some of what I've been holding personally, and it would be fine. She glanced at him. I'm not saying I want to stop. I'm saying I want to make sure I'm choosing it rather than just continuing it. That's a different thing, he said. Yeah. She looked at Emma, who had found a spot near the pond's edge and was crouched down, level with the water, studying something with the total absorption of a person for whom the boundary between observation and wonder hadn't collapsed yet. She does that, Vanessa said. That quality of just completely being where she is. She's 8, Nathan said. It's easier at 8. Maybe, but I've watched you do it too. She turned back to him. You have a way of being entirely in the thing in front of you. It's not something most people in my world have. Most people in your world have too much future to manage, he said. I had a period in my life where the future got very uncertain very suddenly, and I learned to put most of my weight in the present because the present was the only thing I could trust. He paused. I'm not saying it was wisdom. It started as survival. It just turned into something I kept. She was looking at him with the expression he'd come to recognize as her most honest one. Not the composed CEO, not the careful strategist, but the woman standing in an ordinary Saturday morning, holding a question about her own life with both hands. I want to keep building this, she said. Whatever this is. The three of us, the park, the taco place, the arguments about books. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to decide anything today. I just wanted to say it out loud to you so it wasn't just something I was carrying by myself. He stood with that for a moment. The honesty of it, the specific courage required to say a thing like that plainly to another person without dressing it up in performance or managing the vulnerability of it. He thought about the ballroom. The 2 words. The whole chain of events that had followed from 30 seconds of instinct in a room full of people who had all looked away. He thought about Emma, 3 years ago, in the back seat of the car driving south out of New York with all their necessary things and almost no plan, asking if the new city had ducks. He thought about Claire, who had been the kind of honest that Vanessa was being right now, who would have had something precise and good to say about this moment if she'd been here, and who wasn't, and who he carried with him the way you carry the people who made you into who you are. I want to keep building it too, he said. No ceremony, no dramatic framing, just true, said plainly, between 2 people who had both gotten good at not overstating things. Vanessa exhaled slightly. Not relief so much as the ease of something resolved. The particular feeling when words you've been holding find their right place. Down by the water, Emma stood up from her crouched observation and turned and called back to them. The new male is consolidating faster than the last one. He's smarter about alliances. How can you tell? Vanessa called back. He doesn't try to control everyone at once, Emma said. He just makes sure the important ones are on his side. Nathan and Vanessa looked at each other. She's going to be something, Vanessa said. I know, Nathan said. He meant it as a fact and as a weight he carried and as a source of something that didn't have a better word than pride, although pride was too small for what it actually was. He meant it the way you mean things when they're the center of everything you've built and chosen and become. They walked down to where Emma was standing at the water's edge, the 3 of them in the clear February light, and stayed there for a while, watching the ducks navigate their small, complicated world with whatever they had available to them, which turned out, on this particular Saturday, to be enough. There are things you plan for. There are things that arrive sideways from a direction you weren't watching. Nathan Cross had spent enough years in enough different lives to know the difference, and to know that the unplanned arrivals, the ones that came without a roadmap, that couldn't be vetted or prepared for or assessed in advance, were usually the ones that changed everything. 2 words in a ballroom, a card in a shirt pocket, a whiteboard full of boxes and arrows in a small office with 1 window. The gap between surviving and genuinely living is not wide, but it asks for something specific to cross it. Not courage, not intelligence, not money or status or any of the things the world tells you are the essential currencies. It asks only that you stay honest about what you see, do the work that's in front of you, and keep the door open to the people who are willing to walk through it honestly. Everything else, the rest of it, the whole complicated, imperfect, occasionally overcooked pasta of it, tends to find its shape from there. The ducks moved on the water, Emma wrote in her field journal. The city went about its Saturday business, indifferent and alive. And in a park in Charlotte, in the last of the winter light, 3 people who had found each other by accident stood at the edge of what came next, which was uncertain and ordinary and entirely worth building.